And if you notice, a lot of the generalists over the last 80 years, 70 years have become entrepreneurs. Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, people who are multidisciplinary, maybe not polymaths, it depends on your definition, but they were multidisciplinary, they wore many hats, especially Steve Jobs. They became their own thing. They just were outliers because they couldn't be specialists. And we're seeing now, because we're in the fourth industrial revolution right now, we're seeing in this digital renaissance, this change where generalists are thriving. Like you and I are creating content, right? We'll be able to do the things we want to do because we're able to adapt to all the new changes that are happening. Social media platforms change month to month, let alone every 6 months to a year.
Welcome creators, artists, smart professionals, and all those ready to take action and create a passion-centered lifestyle. This is another episode of the Creative Action Podcast. I'm your host, Bruno Flow. Let's unlock greater levels of flow, freedom, and fulfillment together. This is another episode of the Creative Action Podcast, and here I am with Dustin PolyInnovator. He teaches knowledge management for polymaths, which is pretty cool, and that's one of the reasons I got lured into his content and learned about everything that he's doing. He's a blogger, he's a YouTuber, he's a podcaster also, and has been making content for over a decade. So, hey Dustin, what's up, man?
Thanks for having me, Bruno.
No, man, it's an honor to have you here. And just to start this meeting, tell me, Dustin, what is being a polymath? What's your interpretation, and why is this important for you?
I have a bit of my own opinion, but I've also been influenced by a lot of the great researchers in the space. There's a few different doctors and masters, people who did their dissertation on what it actually means to be a polymath. There's a lot of different terms people kind of identify with, like jack of all trades, multi-potentialite, generalist. But to me, they all fall under the journey of becoming a polymath. There's different levels of expertise and different areas of knowledge, like how many areas. So the kind of common understanding is that you have 3 or more expert level or expertise with an insatiable curiosity. It's like curiosity is a real key part of it. And when I say expert levels, think of it kind of like a multi-specialist, if you will.
Okay, so a multi-specialist. But what is the difference, in example, of being a polymath versus being a multi-passionate creator, in example?
Passion's great, but passion doesn't necessarily mean that you've done a lot of different things. Multi-passionate is just someone who has passions in many different areas. You might be really interested in video games, content creation, maybe I'm projecting, that's me basically right there. I like to think of it like a scale. So I came up with what I call the multidisciplinary spectrum. Multi-passionate is basically just multidisciplinary. Doesn't necessarily mean that you've done a lot in those different passions. However, when you look at the scale, you kind of get an idea about it. You kind of start off with the multi-potentialite. That's a term where people use like, hey, I have the potential to do many different things. I'm multi-passionate. Cool. Again, you have to start doing those things. So I kind of see it as the beginning. You're pluripotent. You could do many different things. You're the jack of all trades, putting all your different hands in all the different cookie jars and finding which one you like. And that's kind of the key thing there is like, yes, you might be multi-passionate, but you're going to find something that you prefer more so. In the book Range by David Epstein, he talks about Roger Federer, who's a famous tennis player. And Roger actually played a ton of different sports, like a dozen different sports when he was a kid. And he was really good at a lot of them. But as soon as he landed on tennis, that's what he actually got really good at. And he actually really liked wrestling, for example. A lot of people didn't know that. But the point is, he dabbled in all these different cookie jars, found the cookie he liked. He learned how to make the cookie, if you will, if you want to take that analogy further, and continued down that path. The generalist is the next step up. You've kind of decreased the amount of cookies you're eating. You decrease the range, but you started increasing the depth. So instead of maybe 15 areas like the jack of all trades, maybe more like 6, 5. And then from there, you might have more time spent in 3 areas and you become more of a polymath. Now, a polymath can be way more than 3, but 3 is kind of the baseline minimum.
Ah, interesting. So it seems like it depends on how much you want to... how many disciplines you want to engage at the same time. Obviously, is the amount of time you can dedicate to the mastery of each one, and it makes sense. Obviously, we have limited time, and there is some layer of prioritization or decision in how do you want to use your time or prioritize your interest in some sense. And I resonate with this. And also, this polymath concept is something I found by accident, and I never knew this existed. Like I just was doing my thing, and probably it was the same as you. And one day I found out this. Oh, what the fuck? This sounds like something I would aspire towards, or I resonate with that. I like that idea. And I'm wondering, Dustin, how was it for you when you found about this, or why has this polymath thing become something important for you?
So, in contrast to you, I didn't just like come across the word per se in my adult life. For me, it's been kind of all throughout my whole life. I know that there's a lot of people who don't know what they want to do in their life. They don't know if they want to be a generalist or a specialist. They just don't know. And then over time, they start to figure out they might go to college for it or something like that. I've kind of been lucky in the sense that I've always known what I wanted to do to some degree. And through that, I knew I wanted to do many different things. So when I was a kid, I wanted to be kind of an entrepreneur. And I can get more in detail later on, but I knew entrepreneur is kind of the right thing. And when you're an entrepreneur, you have to wear many hats. As I got older, I started working in a recreation facility, so basically a gym. And I started doing many different jobs in that gym. At one point, I held 6 different roles at once. And I enjoyed being pulled in many of those different directions. And I found myself realizing like, oh, I do like doing many different things at once. I do like this, being this multi-faceted person. And when I was in middle school, I was really obsessed with Leonardo da Vinci. It was basically any polymath's hero pretty much. And because of him, like he really is my hero though. And it's one of those things where I want to be the next Da Vinci, if you will.
You know what? You know what's my polymath hero? Which one is? Bruce Lee for me.
Bruce Lee, yeah. Bruce
yeah,
Lee's
because he's a for me he's a polymath, man. Definitely.
Well, he talks about being fluid like water, and polymaths are way more adaptable to different environments.
That's true. But the guy was a philosopher who is a martial artist. He was also an actor. What the fuck, man?
Author, yeah.
Also,
it's interesting. It's interesting to think about that, though. And so, even from a young age, I had that kind of generalist mindset. And polymath was the term that I fell in love with over the other ones. Because some people like jack of all trades, for example, but I prefer polymath. There seems to be more of a goal to reach towards. Yeah,
that jack of all trades concept is not something that you like to be like that. Is people say you in that, people refer to you in that way, and you feel like he's not saying that in a good way. He's saying that in a.
Well, you know that's because people are actually quoting it wrong. So this is something I say in a lot of different podcasts because people don't realize this, but they say jack of all trades, master of none. But that's only half of the quote. The rest of the quote goes, but oftentimes better than a master of one. And so the quote actually is a positive connotation, but what most people only reference the first half, which is a negative connotation. So it's interesting to think about that. Like a jack of all trades is not a bad thing. People think you're spreading yourself too thin, but in actuality, you're just really kind of switching between different things. And eventually, if you do it long enough, you get really good at them. You can become a polymath by just juggling many different things at once for a long enough time.
Yes, and there is like I don't know, it's like a personal philosophy related to mastery. That how I see it, it's like it is an idea I have that when we probably will live like 60 years, we could say 70 years, I don't know, maybe 80, taking in account technology and medicine and everything. I think with 5 years of focused effort in trying to learn something, becoming a master at something, you can reach a pretty decent level with 5 years of dedication to learning an art or a discipline. So a nice experiment I like to do is to think about how many arts or disciplines could I master in my whole life if I use my life in an intelligent way. So let's say I live 60 years, like let's not be like...
and you won't start doing stuff till you're about 20s. You only really have about 40 years.
Yeah, let's say 40 years. And let's say I use 5 years, like focus 5 years in learning an art. It means I could master 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 arts. It's a lot, man. I could be a master of 8 things.
I think you're being a little generous though with the
Hmm.
5-year thing, but ironically,
Hmm.
I agree more with you. So there's a big misunderstanding when it comes to mastery and understanding certain topics. So Malcolm Gladwell popularized the 10,000 hours concept,
Yeah,
but even
yeah, yeah.
he kind of took that back a little bit.
Hmm.
It's like depending on how you practice
Mm-hmm.
and how you get the information, you can learn a lot quicker. So by having a coach or doing deliberate practice or both, you can accelerate your learning quite a bit by using transcontextual thinking. So taking one area of knowledge and using that as a
Exactly.
baseline to learn another one.
Ye-
Between those different things, you can accelerate your learning.
Yes, and also when you learn your first discipline, let's say you become the master of the first thing in your life. I don't know. In my case, it was martial arts. When I
For me, is
was
swimming.
swimming, it was yours. When I was 13 years old, I was black belt in taekwondo. So I was like kind of a master, like being a child. I already, when I was 13 years old, I was practicing for 7 years, which is a good amount of time. But the thing is that thanks to that, it was very easy for me to learn other stuff because I already had the like the meta about learning something. You know, it's repetition, it's being deliberate, being conscious, having discipline. And I think that after you learn your first thing, it's easier to learn whatever else you want to learn. And that's good news, I think. So obviously, that calculation of 5 years per thing per discipline is a little bit
That's you can do it
bullshit.
in 5 years, but no, it's not bullshit. It's just like you have to make sure you're doing deliberate practice, and it also depends on the skill. If you're
Mm-hmm.
learning chess, for example, which is very
Oh,
repeatable,
watch.
it's a
Yeah.
simple skill, versus learning something that like I guess martial arts is a lot more complicated, but learning a more complex skill can be a much more different aspect. So even like programming is pretty repeatable,
And
repeatable.
also,
I
it,
can't remember.
it depends on what you want to achieve with each discipline, or what's your concept of
You don't have
mastery.
to become a master,
Yeah, why? I mean, in example,
That's the
when
last 10,
hmm,
20%. Like that's too much.
in example
Much time on that.
when there is this like diminishing return when you are learning something. At the beginning, you learn very fast and you learn a lot, and you can mm, uh, use those skills in a functional way pretty quickly. Um, but at some point, when you continue practicing, it becomes like you hit plateaus like for a long time. It's part of the mastery journey. There is this book by George Leonard, I think it's called Mastery. Yeah, just plain Mastery, and he talks about the learning curves of the mastery process and how this dynamic in which it's like you level up and then you have a plateau and you level up, and each time you level up, the plateau is longer. So, and he proposed a philosophy in which you are not attached to the outcome and you are just flowing with the process.
That's and that's why the last 20% is not really worth it because the plateaus just get too long.
Yes.
I have introduced this idea. I think I'm really the only one who's talked about it for the most part, called skill tree based learning. So, as someone who grew up with a lot of video games in my background, skill trees were very interesting to me. You would go down this path or this path or this
Mm-hmm.
path. And I've been taking massively open online courses, MOOCs, like basically like Coursera, edX,
Mm-hmm.
since like 2012, basically, since they basically came out, or at least 2013 for the most part. Like I was super early on taking these online courses. And I found that the linear structure of these courses was a big issue for a lot of people. Most people, like 95% of people, don't finish these courses they start.
Mm.
And the ones who pay generally, it's like it drops down to like 70% or whatever, but so like 30% actually complete it.
Mm-hmm.
But like if you don't pay, or even if you do pay, most people don't finish them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because it lacks that its ability to grab their attention.
Mm.
However, even specialist, narrow focused people, not like multi passionate people, I think we're all a little bit of both, but like even the people who are, really focused on just one thing, they don't want to sit there and just learn that one thing over and over and over again. There's this lack of focus and lack of interest that will occur, especially when you hit those plateaus. Sometimes you need to hit that plateau and face it. And that's where I think a lot of multi-passionate people fail to become polymaths because they don't face the plateaus. They switch to the next thing prematurely.
Yeah.
However, there is this also mindset that by switching, you can continue down another pathway, gain some progress, gain some new skill that could then help you in that original pathway. So that's why I like the skill tree based one. So like if you're trying to build a house, you have to learn wiring, electricity, plumbing, wood carving, and then the actual holistic course being like the blueprint. How do you actually build the house? Well, if you get tired of the wood carving pathway and you're like, I want to learn plumbing now or electricity now, you can switch between them. You're still learning how to build a house. You're just learning a different path.
I like that. I like that. It's like because at some point I was a little bit stubborn with how I approach mastery, let's say, and oh no, I should continue with this thing even if I wasn't actually interested anymore, or I was getting like a bit that meh feeling, you know, like oh yeah, playing guitar, an example. That will be like my second strong skill, let's say. At some point, I got bored of playing guitar because I don't know. I was just my mind was elsewhere. I don't know. It
If you're not
just
passionate
changed.
about it, don't do it. Yeah.
Yes, and there is nothing wrong with changing for a bit. And then after that, I don't know. I had a different season. An example, in my case, I got more into sound engineering. It was more into the technical aspect, and not that much into the composition or music aspect. Well, I had a season of that, of being an engineer. And it was like that. And I like that. In my case, that's like part of my philosophy of the polymath approach, let's say. I don't consider myself a polymath, or I don't know, I feel like a little
Or
bit
like
like...
proto-polymaths, as I call it. Like we could probably pass off when it comes to like having 3 or more areas of knowledge. We could probably say that we're polymaths, but in my opinion, I care more about the journey of becoming one. And so I call myself a
Yes.
proto-polymath, even though some people have called me one because I do have at least 3 deep skills. But I like the proto. I like being on the journey. That's more fun. That's more engaging.
Yes. Maybe the same reason why I don't like to say I'm a polymath is the same reason I don't like to say I'm a master at anything. And that's part of the beginner's mind, I think, of always learning, always enjoying that process of gathering more knowledge or sharing knowledge with others. And you always learn from others, and you always surprise yourself from overcoming different obstacles or plateaus. Oh, what the fuck, I leveled up, and you realize you leveled up. That kind of experience of learning any skill, which is what brings meaning to my life in my case, or what makes me passionate about yes, waking up at every day. So, Dustin, what's your motivation for producing content for over a decade? Man, it's more than 10 years.
It's probably closer to 12 at this point.
Wow.
And I will say, I was not consistent, but I was doing it over those years. There was a big hiatus in the middle of the 2010s, but that was mainly because I was doing school and stuff like that. But I started blogging back in like 2012. And my motivation was I created an organization called the United Living Construct, which I was aiming to be a global capital of innovation for the world, like a hub of innovation for polymaths. And I didn't necessarily articulate it as that, but that was what I was trying to do. And I was trying to find the right words to articulate. But United Living Construct, a construct is like a formation. It's not actually like not construction, right? So it's a formation of ideas. And I wanted to build a physical construct that was like a seastead or a smart city. And I realized that in order to kind of gain traction with that, content marketing, even back in 2012, was the key. So I started blogging, and then I brought it back in like early 2017. And like I think it was like for a year and a half. I did it up until like 2014. But there was a few years there where I failed to continue things. But 2017, I went hard about it again. Started making more blogs, started doing more with it. Even started making a podcast, which I did about like 20 episodes with that. But I realized I wasn't good enough yet. Because at that time I was 19? No, not 23, something like that. I was young. And I realized that I had a lot of potential, but I needed to have more skills, and I needed to have more ability to communicate and just have self-development. I just needed time to do self-development. I was young. I decided not to go to college because it wasn't right for me. I eventually did some college, but it's one of those things where I was like, I'm going to pursue my own self-education, and I needed to build a personal brand first. And in this ULC that I created, I came up with this idea for different people, the uniters, the leaders, and the creators. But there was someone who was all 3, the polyocean, if you will. Like Oceans were the people I created. I don't want to get too in the weeds with that particular thing, but this idea of the Polyocean was essentially just a polymath. That's where I got the poly anyways from. And I realized I need to just roll with that because polymath is already kind of a weird word. People don't always know about it. Even people who are polymathic don't know about it. So it's already kind of out there. I'm going to go with that word, but I need to make a more modern word. And so I thought about it and I was like, okay, I want to be in innovation. I want to innovate certain fields and be known as an innovator, but I want to innovate multiple fields. That's where PolyInnovator came from. That's where I chose my personal brand name. That is my name. I care more about the PolyInnovator name than my actual name. And I started making content for the ULC and my personal brand. Eventually realized I couldn't really keep doing both. I wasn't good enough yet because even though I had been blogging for a long time, I was new to podcasting and I was definitely very new to video creating. And so I'm not like right now I have hand gestures. I'm looking at the camera. I'm trying to project into the mic. These are all skills you learn by just doing those 100 reps. But those 100 reps start over with the different content types, written, audio, and video. And so I stopped doing the ULC. I actually took all those posts and put it into my PolyInnovator website. I took the podcast, put it into my Polycast feed, and I started making a new content based around just my polymath stuff that I was doing. And I created my own do-it-yourself degree, DIY degree, and now I call it the modular degree because it's a modular approach to self-education. And I created content through that. And that's where I started the PolyInnovator brand, is through that self-education.
Okay, so I got interest about this degree that you are mentioning. And can you expand a little bit more about that?
So there was all these different courses, like I mentioned earlier, and there was no way to organize them, especially when you go to different platforms. I want to go Coursera, edX, FutureLearn, Udacity, Udemy, all these different places. And I wanted to create a list organized based on my own personal idea. I created a basic taxonomy of semesters, but they weren't really semesters per se, but essentially they were. And I started out doing it in Google Sheets, found it to be very inefficient at the amount of courses that I added in there. At one point I had like 400 courses in that list, which is too much. But I would trim the fat, cut it down. Eventually I moved to Airtable, which was a database tool. It was a lot better. This is still really early on for this tool, mind you. And then eventually I moved into Notion. And I hated Notion at first, but once I learned how to use it, I realized it was more powerful than any of the other tools. And I used it for like 6 years up until I started switching out to other tools. I realized how much I love knowledge management tools like Notion or Obsidian or Capacities and all these different amazing platforms. And I found myself playing around with them more and more, kind of leaving away from the modular degree. And I created a template in Notion for people to use. And I want to create a platform down the line so people can actually create their own degrees using resources like courses, books, audiobooks, podcasts, videos, whatever, blog posts, whatever kind of content you have online, curate it into a list based on the taxonomy you prefer, whether it's like, semesters or sprints or whatever. But that ended up being one part of a holistic knowledge management system that I created. And since I was a prolific content creator too, I needed a powerful database for content production. So I had this input and I had this output. And I started working on the holistic system above it. And it took me a couple eureka moments before I really got that system to be done. But I remember like December 2021 or 2020 or something like that, I had this moment of like, oh, this is how I need to fix it. And I made some tweaks and it worked. And I started moving that system to new tools. And so I kind of found myself learning more, using a modular degree, creating more with my content production, and then having this PIOS, as I called it, the Poly Innovation Operating System, in multiple different tools. It worked really well.
So it seems like this PolyInnovator operation system is like your life's work, basically.
You could say so. The Poly Innovation Operating System, PIOS for short, is something that I think is going to help a lot of people. I made it for polymaths because all these different tools and all these different systems like the para method or GTD, get things done, they were made well before these tools were ever created, and they were kind of just shoehorned into the tools. And some people love the para method, but I find the second brain kind of thing. But I find that they're pretty inefficient, especially when it comes to like actually making use of all the features of these tools. And I definitely don't like them for self-education either. They're great for, managing projects for the most part, but when it comes to actually learning and even content production, they're a bit limited. And so I found myself wanting to create a more modern system.
So you mentioned about this technology or approach to organize your own skill tree, let's say, or your own career in some sense, because you are picking your own courses or whatever it is that you want to learn, and you are basically laying it out in some kind of order, logical order. This is something that is part of this knowledge management system that you mentioned.
I call them phases. And so think of a phase as a particular focus or niche. So I have that niche of self-education, but I also have being a content creator as a topic is one of my niches. I love talking about that, and I love nerding out about how do you make content. Another niche for me is gaming. Another one is swimming too. So I have a few different niches. Each one is their own different phase. And while they can be sequential, there's also a lot of times where they overlap and they might be at the same time. It really depends on what you want to do. I definitely find the Pareto principle,
Yes.
the 80-20 rule, to be pretty helpful in this case. You do 80% of your focus on the main niche, 10% on the past one, keeping that flame alive, 10% on the next one, sowing the seeds for the next one. Or 20-20-60 actually works pretty well too.
At this point, sorry.
Yes.
Continue.
I just wanted to wrap it real quick because the phases are interesting, because when I made my semesters for my modular degree, I planned them out based on what future phases that I envisioned that I was going to do. And so like the first one would be more about like content. The second one was a little bit more about like, I think there was one was like smart city development, which is what I wanted to go into. And so I had different phases for different future careers or future niches that I wanted to work in. And so I kind of had that plan even way back then. And you can organize your phases, which in all your projects and tasks and goals go into those phases.
I like very much this idea of being deliberate and proactive about your own education. It's something I'm not reading a lot about in social media in general, but it's something I was thinking for myself. It's something I do for myself, but I think it's the first time I'm talking to someone that is actually mentioning it, and it seems that you put already a lot of work in figuring out your own approach to organizing your own skill tree, let's say, or your own, your own knowledge, because it's like that. In my case, as an entrepreneur, I had to do that because I knew that as an entrepreneur, I had to learn how to do sales. In example, I had to learn how to create a product, how to do marketing.
To wear many hats.
Exactly. That's one of the things that I think entrepreneurs and polymaths have in common, or at least an overlap in some sense. Maybe the difference is that the entrepreneur is doing everything mostly because he wants
Out of
to
necessity.
Yes, it's like more functional. It's like, okay, I know how to make sales. Okay, that's it. I learn how to do sales. That's it. It's not like I'm passionate about necessarily doing the perfect sale or being an artist of selling as an entrepreneur. Maybe not, but maybe yes. I don't know. Maybe someone likes selling a lot, but it's more practical. Let's say. And I think the polymath is not necessarily like that. It's mostly driven by passion, probably, or by this. This word Kaizen. This mindset of the continuous learning and always improving and always embracing that path of mastery. But yes, I got very interested on that part of how do you organize your self-education. And so you created like these niches or content for these, or courses, better said, for these niches: self-education, content creation, gaming, and swimming. Am I right?
I haven't made courses yet, but I kind of made one. But the courses I was talking about were for like Coursera or edX. Like they were already made.
Okay. So you're organizing things that are already made in those niches that are your interest, let's say. So
I do want to make courses too, but that's a whole separate.
yes. It's a lot of work also. It's a lot of work. And from all these niches you are exploring as a polymath or as a person with many interests, which one is that one that is motivating you the most at this point in your life?
I found myself in the last year quite unmotivated, but in each of these different phases, I always considered the content to be kind of the baseline foundation.
Okay.
And then each phase has a big project, maybe two big projects, but mainly just one that I need to focus on. So like, for example, the modular degree phase, the first project was create a template so people can use. The big project from that is going to take a lot more people to build, is building like a learning management system to actually build a platform for people. I have to wait so I can get that done. But I made the template. My swimming phase right now is just a newsletter. It's not like I do more than, I'm not making videos on it. I should at some point.
Wow, it's a lot. A newsletter.
It's a lot, yeah. I want to make a course too, but the big project I want to get done with that is writing my How to Swim book. I've been trying to do this for half a decade now, actually, at this point. And, I'm probably like halfway done, but I need to actually just work on it. Recently, I finished one of my big projects, the content creator brand, Polytools. I made a YouTube channel for it. It started out as a newsletter, but I wanted to create a tools directory of all the different things I've come across as a content creator, like the Polymath toolkit, as I call it. Because it's not just for content creators, but that's what I'm marketing it for. But like, you can find knowledge management stuff on there. You can find video editing stuff on there. You can find even note-taking stuff, like anything really for like you wanted to do. But I found every tool in the knowledge management category, every tool in the social media management scheduler category. And so I wanted to have a place where they're all listed, because there was no other place really that did that. And I finally finished that website for the third time, mind you, but I found the best version of it recently. And so now that phase, I can kind of put a cap on it, keep making some content for it, but I can kind of not have to worry about that phase anymore. Now I just keep that flame alive by making content, and then I can focus on the next big project, which is the swimming book.
Amazing, man. And well, I'm like amazed at how many things you do, man. Like you are embodying the polymath archetype, like 100%.
I can't always say I'm successful, but the point is I try.
Of course, man, of course. But you saying that speaks good of you. Like you are embracing the path of mastery, let's say. And what I want to ask you is, because as polymath or multipassionate or multipotentialites, we often struggle with society, basically, because school wants to fit you into a box. Yes, it narrows you down to very limited areas of interest, and also like getting a job and all the basic things that people do, like all the requirements of being a functional adult in modern life, that maybe as a multipotentialite you may struggle with that, and it was in my case. But I would like to hear from you, what would you say to someone that identifies himself as a multipotentialite or a multipassionate and maybe is struggling to fit into society, or maybe is stuck in survival mode because doesn't know how to balance his own interest with actually being functional in the world or in society?
So society is making this mindset that you have to be narrow, but that's only about 100 years old, since the first or second industrial revolution. Basically, we've had generalists throughout our entire human history. There's actually some studies from the Max Planck Institute of Technology that talk about how generalists are the reason why Homo sapiens evolved versus the other hominids, because we were able to adapt to different environments. Everybody has this potential to do many different things, but some people might lean more towards specialism. Some people might lean more towards generalists. We have both in society. We've always had both. And if you notice, a lot of the generalists over the last 80 years, 70 years have become entrepreneurs. Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, people who are multidisciplinary, maybe not polymaths, it depends on your definition, but they were multidisciplinary. They wore many hats, especially Steve Jobs. They became their own thing. They just were outliers because they couldn't be specialists. And we're seeing now, because we're in like the fourth industrial revolution right now, we're seeing in this digital renaissance, this change where generalists are thriving. Like you and I are creating content, right? We'll be able to do the things we want to do because we're able to adapt to all the new changes that are happening. Social media platforms change month to month, let alone every 6 months to a year. And being able to adapt to those changes and adapt your strategies to it, it's a big deal. learning how to make different content types. It takes, like I said, 100 reps to get good at videos or blog posts or podcasts. And even then, that's just getting good. You might not be great yet. I've made over 250 podcasts at this point. I've made probably 350 videos, but I've made over 600 blog posts. I definitely consider myself way more of a blogger than the other two, but it's because I've done it for so long. But it takes time for those things. But it's because I was able to adapt and do many different blogs and try out Substack, try out Paragraph.xyz, all these new different platforms that came out, and pay attention to the trends.
And what would be your, if you had to recommend a starter pack, let's say for someone that is maybe he's lost. Picture that the guy is lost. He's feeling this sense of despair of not knowing where to focus, not knowing where to go, what to do, how to use his energy, his creativity. And what would be a starter pack for this person that identifies with the archetype but is not sure how to use his talent, let's say, or his time even?
Whether he or she is young or old, they're going to have some sort of interest and some sort of specialty to some degree. I would say if you really have a hard time making a decision, use the Eisenhower matrix to determine which one is the most priority. I don't know enough to necessarily explain it simply, so just Google it and that'll help make it easier.
Yes.
But it helps.
Time management matrix also. Time management matrix by Stephen Covey, if anyone maybe.
Well, and so I don't know if it was Einstein. Someone said to like take 10 or 20 different, maybe it was Franklin, something like that. Someone said to like take 10 or 20 different topics, take down 5, take down 5, take down 5, and you get to your top 5. And those are the ones you need to focus all your time on. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people break it down even more to just 2 or 3. Usually you have a career, you have a hobby. Sometimes that hobby becomes a career, or you have a side hustle, something like that. You have more than one discipline generally. If you're really young, you might only have one. That's because you haven't had enough time to do enough yet. You need to experiment. You need to put all your hands in different cookie jars. You got to figure out what you like. Roger Federer didn't realize what he liked, which sport he liked, until he tried like a dozen different ones for a long time, mind you. And it wasn't super long. There's actually, hold on, let's talk about this. There's a thing called I call it the hourglass philosophy or method or whatever. But essentially, like Roger Federer, he went wide. He went to 12 different sports, played a whole bunch of them, found one he liked, went narrow. And oftentimes, over the course of our life, that process repeats. And so you kind of either get bored because of a plateau, or maybe you get injured so you can't do tennis anymore or something like that. You fix something else. So you have to go wide again. And then you find the one you like, and you focus on that, and you go wide again. So it's not about focusing on just one thing and being a specialist. It's more about focusing either serialized or juggling. Are you going to juggle many different things and split your attention 33, 33, 33? Or are you going to do one thing really well and then move on to the next thing really well and eventually do multiple over the course of your life? Like I call it the juggling versus serialized approach. And these are terms that I talked about in my Polymath newsletter too, mind you. So if people want to learn more, they can check that out. But these approaches are important because you have to figure out what you like before you can actually spend the time on it.
Definitely, man. I really like that advice. It's like that exploration phase. I call it in that way. It's like use some time to explore because there is so much shit going on in the world and the world is so big and there are so many things to experience that I think it's a good idea to dedicate some time to that, definitely. And what I'm taking from what you say, mostly, you know what it is? It's like you're talking about approach, about methods, about you are talking in that way. That means like having some level of awareness of what you want. No, like
you have to have self-awareness.
Some level of awareness to what you are doing. Like, okay, well, I'm in survival mode. I need to survive basically. Okay, that's the priority. I don't know. I'm thinking about in my own experience in life. Of course, I had many interests. I love many things. But I live in Argentina. In Argentina, also my family was I come from a very poor background, let's say. And Argentina is always, in general, the country is in perpetual economical crisis. Yes. So that was a challenge for me when I was like a teenager and everything. I had to work a lot. And sometimes I had to work from things that I, quote unquote, didn't like, in example. But the opening...
Like the shadow.
yeah, but opening myself to that was explorer phase. Well, I was exploring a lot in that challenge of survival, and I learned a lot of stuff. Like I know how to do how to build a floor. I don't know. I know how to do that. Example, what the fuck? Why? Why I don't know how to do that? Well, it's just life. I don't know. But after going through that phase of exploration and survival at the same time, I had to make like conscious decisions. Okay, well, I need money.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to be conscious about what I'm learning. So this thing I'm learning will enable me to get to the next point, to the next step in my strategy, let's say. And that was my approach. It was having awareness and an actual approach or strategy about what I was doing, and not maybe dabbling in stuff, and not knowing, not having a, there's this concept in chess. It's better to have a bad strategy than to have no strategy. So yes, it's like embracing that kind of deliberate approach to this personality that by some reason you have. I mean, you're a multipassionate, you are a multipotentialite. Well, man, what do you do with that? How can you use this set of conditions that you have in a way that helps you to move forward in your own goals or whatever desires you have for your life? What would you say is the role in technology right now in our lives as aspiring polymaths? What's your approach to technology?
Well, I already mentioned the digital renaissance, which is a birthing place of a lot of digital generalists or digital polymaths. And the idea that now that we have all our access to this information at our fingertips is very important. And that's why I created the modular degree, because you have to be able to organize all that information, all these different resources. I use Obsidian now to organize my life.
Good.
And there's one plugin that's amazing. It's like the Read It Later plugin, and it literally lets you save. Like if you have a link copied to your keyboard, you literally just press the hotkey you design, and it saves that article straight to your computer. And I found myself realizing that a lot of websites go down. A lot of websites might revamp their whole thing, and you lose access to that old blog post. If there's something that you prefer keeping around, especially if it's informational and evergreen, you should save it. You shouldn't just read it and bookmark it. I found that Notion actually failed to do the web clipping almost 95% of the time. I would tell it to save an article, and it would save the title and the link, and that was it. And so, but this tool has worked literally 99%.
What's the name of the tool?
Read It Later. It's a plugin for Obsidian, though.
Ah, great.
You have to be using Obsidian. Obsidian is just my preferred note-taking, knowledge management tool of choice.
Great. Yes. What would be the tech stack you would recommend to an aspiring polymath?
I could think of one as a content creator, but when it comes to Polymath, it generally is the one that you can use. So some people like paper. So if you have a paper journal, that's great. Maybe get a Rocket notebook where you can actually have it transferred to computer or use digital penmanship notes or whatever. But I don't like really writing things down. I'd rather type it. I'd rather have everything digitally. I have tested a lot of PKM tools, and Obsidian seems to be the best. Capacities is pretty good. Notion's good for some people, but like I said, Notion's gone downhill. And other than that, there's really not many other choices, because there's dozens of other options out there, but most of them don't compete when it comes to the quality of what you're getting from these other tools. I know that some people really like Tana too, but having a strong knowledge management tool like that, PKM tool, that's important. And then if you're making content, there's a lot of tools that you could have a tech stack for. But I would also find a way to minimize your wasted time. So I use Arc browser to make sure I manage my tabs well and that kind of thing, and have different spaces for work, different spaces for streaming. But there's also things like have the right space, right? Have your desktop on your computer clear. Have your living space minimalist and clear, so your mind is focused on the task at hand, that kind of thing. Don't overdo it. It's not really tech stack, but it's more about what you can do.
Yes, I know that you have these. You have a lot of websites, man. You need to start saying all your projects. Yes, you have this website in which you are creating all your tools for content management, and I think for Polymaths also, or is only content management?
So like I said, it's basically for Polymaths. I made it because it's a Polymaths toolkit. But the marketing is mainly towards content creators because I feel like that's the niche that's going to make it grow farther. But for example, I wanted to find a place that had all the different knowledge management tools out there. And toolfinder.co, shout out to Francesco at Toolfinder because he created a very amazing website, but they didn't have all the tools on the market. And I wanted to create a website that had all the tools. They focus more on finding the best tool for you. I wanted to go wide with it. And so I found myself really focusing on trying to have everything and do it well. And then my main website, polyinnovator.space, is where I have most of my blog posts. That's where I started the Polytools newsletter, but I moved everything over. Now it's just my Polymath newsletter, my swimming newsletter, and then my other blog posts, which could be a variety of different topics. But that's where you can find the Journey to Polymath newsletter.
And what's the website with all the tools for polymaths?
Polytools.blog.
Excellent. Polytools.blog. So if you are interested in getting a little bit of all the tools that this guy has been collecting for a long time, Dustin, this is great, man, because you know how many people there are that they don't know like how many tools there are. Like they are just there waiting for us to take our results to the next level. So I think that's great. Is just to start wrapping up this conversation. Can you mention your projects or how people can reach you out and talk polymath things with you?
Well, I'm Polyinnovator. I'm PolyInnovator on every platform, and like I said, my main website is polyinnovator.space. So you can find basically all my socials on there. If there's a particular platform you prefer, I create clips of all my podcast interviews and I share them on socials. If you want to find some cool clips to watch, and then if you end up liking those clips, you can find the main actual interview on YouTube. So that's what I probably would point people towards.
The name of your podcast also, please share.
I have two. There's one for Polymaths, the Polymath Polycast, very aptly named, right? And the other one is the Polytools Creator Spotlight, where I interviewed content creators like yourself there. So if you have a journey where you've made a podcast, you made a blog, or you made a YouTube channel, I interview people like that and talk to them about their journey as a creator, and I found it to be fun.
Excellent, Dustin. Man, I enjoy a lot this conversation.
That's good.
Yes, we are wrapping up, and thank you so much. I know people also enjoy this conversation a lot, as me. And I wish you the best with all your projects.